His sheep were gone until he discovered a lone alien woman keeping watch. Whispers among the stars. The morning sun stretched lazy fingers across Thorn Blackwood's pasture, illuminating nothing but empty space where 37 sheep should have been grazing. Thorn stood at the fence, one weathered hand gripping a post so tightly his knuckles had gone white, the other shading his eyes from the glare as he surveyed the vacant field. The gate remained locked, the fence intact, not a single hoof print led away from the enclosure. It was as if his entire flock had simply evaporated overnight. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice rough from years of shouting across windswept hills. "Absolutely impossible." Beside him, his border collie Rusty whined anxiously, circling the perimeter of the fence before returning to press against Thorn's leg. The dog had been acting strange since dawn, packing, whimpering, refusing to enter the pasture where he normally herded sheep with practiced enthusiasm. "What is it, boy? You see something I don't?" Thorn knelt, running his fingers through Rusty's thick fur. The dog's ears were flat against his head, eyes fixed on the distant tree line that marked the edge of Thorn's property. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Following the dog's gaze, Thorn narrowed his eyes. For a moment he thought he saw a flicker of movement, something that didn't belong among the trees. Not a coyote or a wolf, but something different. A glint of metal, perhaps, catching the morning light. "Stay," he commanded Rusty, grabbing his walking stick from where it leaned against the fence. The old oak staff had been a gift from his father, polished smooth from years of use, the wood darkened with age and the oils from his palm. He gripped it tightly as he set off toward the woods, each step deliberate and measured. The forest felt different today. Thorn had walked these woods since childhood, knew every trail and hollow, yet something hung in the air, a stillness that seemed almost expectant. The usual morning chorus of birds had fallen silent, and the leaves barely stirred despite the gentle breeze that should have set them dancing. As he approached the tree line, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He was being watched. Years of living alone in the countryside had honed his instincts, and right now, every one of them was screaming danger. "I know you're there," he called out, planting his walking stick firmly in the ground before him. "Show yourself." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a figure emerged from between two ancient oak trees, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost otherworldly. It was a woman tall and lithe, with skin so pale it almost seemed to glow in the dappled sunlight. Her hair was darker than midnight, cascading down her shoulders in waves that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. But it was her eyes that caught and held Thorn's attention. They were the color of amber, but seemed to shift and swirl like molten gold. She wore what appeared to be a form-fitting bodysuit of some dark material that Thorn couldn't identify. It shimmered faintly, like the surface of a pond under moonlight, and seemed to be embedded with small points of light that pulsed gently. At her wrist was a device that projected a holographic display into the air between them, symbols and diagrams that made no sense to Thorn but clearly meant something to her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice carrying a strange accent he couldn't place, musical almost, with consonants that seemed to resonate a half-second too long. "That's my line," Thorn replied, keeping his walking stick between them. "This is private property." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with those disconcerting eyes. "Your boundary markers are irrelevant. I am monitoring an anomaly." "An anomaly?" Thorn repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. Would this anomaly have anything to do with my missing sheep? A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed her face. "You've noticed the dimensional displacement. Is that what we're calling theft these days?" The woman's lips curved into what might have been a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Your animals have not been stolen, Thorn Blackwood. They have been relocated for their safety." The sound of his name on her lips sent a chill down his spine. "How do you know who I am?" "I know many things about this region. Your farm sits at the center of a spatial anomaly that has been growing for the past 3 lunar cycles." She gestured to the device at her wrist, where the holographic display now showed what appeared to be a map of Thorn's property, overlaid with swirling patterns of light. "My name is Lyra Voss. I am here to investigate and contain the disturbance." Thorn's grip on his walking stick tightened. "Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but I want my sheep back. Now." "That would be unwise," Lyra said, her tone unchanged. "The anomaly is unstable. Your animals were exhibiting signs of quantum displacement. If I had not intervened, they would have suffered molecular degradation." "You're saying my sheep were, what, disappearing?" "In a manner of speaking, yes." Lyra's fingers danced across the holographic display, bringing up new images, diagrams that showed what looked like cellular structures breaking down. "This region is experiencing temporal flux. Reality is thin here." Thorn ran a hand through his graying hair, suddenly feeling every one of his 53 years. "Look, Miss Voss." "Just Lyra." "Lyra then, I've lived on this land my entire life. My father before me and his father before him. If there was something wrong with the what did you call it reality, I think we would have noticed. Lyra's expression remained impassive. The phenomenon is recent and accelerating. Before Thorn could respond, a distant howl echoed through the trees, a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard before. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote, it wasn't any animal native to these woods. The sound seemed to vibrate through his very bones, setting his teeth on edge. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound, her body tensing. The display at her wrist flashed red. "What was that?" Thorn whispered, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he was with only a walking stick for protection. "Interference," Lyra replied, her voice tight. "The anomaly has attracted attention." "What kind of attention?" Instead of answering, Lyra grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We need to move, now." The urgency in her voice brooked no argument. Thorn found himself being pulled along as Lyra moved swiftly through the trees, her steps silent despite the underbrush. Behind them, the strange howling grew louder, joined by a sound like fabric tearing, if the fabric were the air itself. "My dog," Thorn protested, trying to look back toward the farm. "Rusty's still out there." "Your companion animal is safe," Lyra assured him, never slowing her pace. "I've extended the protective field to include him." They emerged from the woods into a small clearing that Thorn didn't recognize, though he was certain he knew every inch of his property. In the center sat what appeared to be a sleek vessel, about the size of a small car, hovering a few inches above the ground. It had no wheels, no visible means of propulsion, and its surface gleamed like burnished silver. "What is that?" Thorn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Transportation," Lyra replied simply. She placed her palm against the smooth exterior, and a section of the vessel's side dissolved, revealing an interior space bathed in soft blue light. The howling behind them intensified, now accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the forest, snapping branches and uprooting shrubs in its passage. "Get in," Lyra commanded, practically shoving Thorn toward the opening. "Not until you tell me what's chasing us." Lyra's amber eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something like concern in their depths. "It is called a rift stalker. It feeds on dimensional instabilities and anything caught within them." As if summoned by her words, a creature burst from the tree line. It was like nothing Thorn had ever seen, a shifting mass of gelatinous tissue that seemed to constantly reform itself. One moment it appeared vaguely canine, the next it was more like an enormous insect, limbs extending and retracting as it moved. The only constant was its eyes, 6 of them, arranged in a circular pattern, glowing with an inner light that seemed to bore into Thorn's very soul. "Oh my God," he breathed, stumbling backward. "Your deities cannot help us," Lyra said grimly, raising her arm. The device at her wrist emitted a pulse of blue energy that formed a barrier between them and the advancing creature. "Only science can." The rift stalker paused, its amorphous body rippling as it assessed the energy barrier. Then it let out another howl, this one filled with what sounded horribly like hunger, and threw itself against the shield. "Inside now," Lyra shouted as the barrier flickered under the impact. This time Thorn didn't argue. He scrambled into the vessel, Lyra right behind him. The opening sealed itself seamlessly as the rift stalker hurled its bulk against the craft, causing it to rock slightly despite its hovering state. Inside, the vessel was larger than it had appeared from the outside, a physical impossibility that Thorn's brain struggled to process. Sleek control panels lined the walls, covered in the same strange symbols he'd seen on Lyra's holographic display. "What about my sheep?" he demanded as Lyra moved to what appeared to be the pilot's seat. "They are in stasis," she replied, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Safe for now." "For now, what does that mean, and what was that thing out there, and who are you really?" Lyra turned to face him, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "I understand your confusion, Thorn Blackwood, but we have more pressing concerns at the moment." Outside, the rift stalker was circling the vessel, its body continuously shifting and reforming as it sought a way inside. Each time it touched the craft's exterior, a ripple of energy pulsed outward, keeping it at bay, but for how long Thorn couldn't guess. "The anomaly on your land is not an isolated incident," Lyra continued, bringing up a 3-dimensional map that hovered in the air between them. It showed Earth, with dozens of pulsing red dots scattered across its surface. "These disturbances are appearing all over your planet. They are tears in the fabric of reality, doorways, if you will, to other dimensions. And these rift stalkers, they come through these doorways." Lyra nodded. "They are drawn to the energy released by the tears. Think of them as predators sensing blood in the water." Thorn sank into a seat opposite her, trying to comprehend the enormity of what she was saying. "Why here? Why my farm?" "That," Lyra said, her amber eyes glowing in the blue light of the vessel's interior, "is precisely what I intend to find out." The Rift Stalker howled again, the sound reverberating through the vessel's hull. It was joined by another cry, then another distant but drawing closer. More of them, Thorn asked, dread settling in his stomach. Lyra's expression was grim as she initiated what appeared to be a launch sequence. They hunt in packs when they sense significant prey. And what exactly is their significant prey in this case? Her eyes met his steady and unyielding. Us, Thorn Blackwood, they hunt us. The Cosmic Shepherd. The vessel hummed to life beneath Thorn's feet, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. Through the transparent viewing panel, he watched the pack of Riftstalkers converge on the clearing, their amorphous bodies flowing like liquid nightmares across the forest floor. Lyra's fingers danced across the control interface, her movements precise and unhurried despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Hold on," she said, not looking up from her work. Thorn barely had time to grip the edges of his seat before the craft shot upward, accelerating with such force that he felt momentarily flattened against the cushioned surface. The Rift Stalkers howled in frustrated hunger below, their cries fading as the vessel climbed higher into the morning sky. "Are we in space?" Thorn gasped, watching the blue of Earth's atmosphere darken to indigo, then to black speckled with stars. "Low orbit," Lyra corrected, adjusting their trajectory. "We need altitude to properly scan the anomaly." As they leveled out, Thorn pressed his face against the viewing panel, marveling at the curve of the Earth below. From here, his problems seemed impossibly small, his missing sheep, his farm, even the terrifying Riftstalkers, all reduced to insignificance by the vastness of space. "I never thought I'd see this," he murmured, momentarily forgetting his fear in the face of such beauty. Lyra glanced at him, something like understanding flickering in her amber eyes. The first view is always impactful. A soft chime drew her attention back to the controls. The holographic display expanded, showing a three-dimensional map of the region surrounding Thorn's farm. At its center pulsed a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of space around it. "There," Lyra said, pointing to the anomaly. "The tier is larger than I initially calculated. Your farm sits directly above a major convergence point." "Convergence of what?" "Realities." She manipulated the display, zooming out to show similar, though smaller, anomalies scattered across the globe. "These tiers are appearing with increasing frequency. Something is weakening the boundaries between dimensions." Thorn rubbed his temples, trying to process the implications. "And my sheep, where are they in all this?" Here, Lyra shifted the display again, revealing a small cluster of energy signatures orbiting the edge of the anomaly. "In a pocket of stable spacetime I created. They're safe, but I can't maintain the field indefinitely." Before Thorn could respond, the vessel's communication system activated with a burst of static. A stern voice cut through the interference, speaking in a language Thorn didn't recognize, all sharp consonants and musical vowels that seemed to overlap themselves. Lyra responded in the same tongue, her tone urgent. The exchange continued for several moments before she terminated the connection with a sharp gesture. "What was that?" Thorn asked, unnerved by the sudden tension in Lyra's posture. "My superior," she replied, already plotting a new course. "Captain Ronan Caldwell of the Sentinel vessel Asteria. They've been tracking the anomalies from orbit." "There are more of you up here." "A small contingent. We've been monitoring Earth for some time." Lyra's expression grew troubled. "The captain believes the source of the tiers has been located. We're to rendezvous with the Asteria immediately." The vessel banked sharply, accelerating with a surge of power that pressed Thorn back into his seat once more. They skirted the edge of the atmosphere, stars wheeling overhead as they adjusted course. "I should warn you," Lyra added almost as an afterthought, "Captain Caldwell is not known for his patience with civilians, especially those from pre-contact worlds." "Pre-contact," Thorn echoed, "you mean Earth doesn't know about, whatever it is you people are." Lyra's lips curved in a small, wry smile. "Your governments have suspicions, but no, there has been no official contact between Earth and the Galactic Sentinel Corps." "Until now," Thorn muttered. "Until now," Lyra agreed. The vessel's sensors pinged, alerting them to another ship's presence. Through the viewing panel, Thorn saw a massive craft materialize against the backdrop of stars. The Asteria dwarfed their small vessel, its sleek lines broken by what appeared to be weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. "That's not exactly a welcome wagon," Thorn observed, his mouth suddenly dry. "The Sentinels are peacekeepers, not diplomats," Lyra said as their vessel approached a docking bay that had opened in the Asteria's hull. "Remember that when you meet the captain." The docking procedure was swift and efficient. As the smaller craft settled into its berth, Thorn felt artificial gravity engage, heavier than Earth's, making his movements sluggish as he followed Lyra through the opening that appeared in the vessel's side. They stepped into a cavernous hangar bay, staffed by beings that were unmistakably not human. Some resembled Lyra, with their pale skin and fluid movements, while others were more obviously alien beings with multiple limbs or skin that shifted colors like living chameleons, or bodies composed of what appeared to be crystalline structures rather than flesh. At the center of this otherworldly assembly stood an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, with iron-gray hair cropped close to his skull and eyes that were entirely black, without whites or visible pupils. He wore a uniform of some dark, reflective material, adorned with symbols that Thorn assumed denoted rank. Captain Caldwell, Lyra greeted him with a formal inclination of her head. Agent Voss, the captain's voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily across the hangar. His accent was different from Lyra's, harsher, more clipped. I see you've brought a native. Thorn bristled at being discussed as if he weren't present. The native has a name, he said, stepping forward, Thorn Blackwood. Caldwell's black eyes fixed on Thorn, assessing him with cold efficiency. Mr. Blackwood, your presence here is unprecedented. Not as unprecedented as finding out my sheep have been abducted by aliens, Thorn retorted, or that my farm is sitting on top of some kind of dimensional rip. Your livestock are the least of our concerns, Caldwell said dismissively. Agent Voss, report. Lyra straightened. The anomaly has progressed beyond initial projections. Rift stalkers have breached containment. I was forced to evacuate the human when they converged on our position. And the artifact? Not located, but the energy signature is unmistakable. It's there somewhere beneath the human's property. Thorn glanced between them. Artifact? What artifact? Caldwell ignored him, turning to address a small group of officers. Prepare a containment team, full hazard protocols. I want that artifact secured before the tier widens further. Sir, one of the officers spoke up, a being with scaled skin and eyes that blinked horizontally. The native settlement is within the blast radius, if we deploy the quantum stabilizers. Acceptable losses, Caldwell cut in. The integrity of the dimensional barriers takes precedence. Now wait just a minute, Thorn interjected, stepping between Caldwell and his officers. You're talking about my home, my neighbors. There's a town less than 5 miles from my farm. You can't just write them off as acceptable losses. Caldwell regarded him with something like surprise. Your species' attachment to geographical locations is noted but irrelevant. The artifact must be contained. If we don't seal the tier, your entire planet could become a feeding ground for rift stalkers and worse. Then let me help, Thorn insisted. I know every inch of that land. If there's something buried there, I can help you find it without resorting to whatever quantum stabilizers are. A murmur rippled through the assembled officers. Caldwell's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Lyra stepped forward. The human has a point, Captain. His knowledge of the terrain could expedite the search. And if we can locate the artifact precisely, we may be able to extract it with minimal damage to the surrounding area. Caldwell's black eyes narrowed. You're advocating for this primitive. I'm advocating for efficiency, Lyra replied smoothly, and for respecting a sentient being's right to protect their home. For a tense moment, Caldwell and Lyra stared at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, the captain relented with a curt nod. Very well, the human may accompany the extraction team, but at the first sign of interference, he'll be removed, forcibly if necessary. Understood, Lyra said, inclining her head once more. As Caldwell strode away, Thorn turned to Lyra. Thank you for that, but what exactly is this artifact, and how did it end up on my farm? Lyra's expression was grave. It's called the Nexus Key, a relic from an ancient civilization that mastered dimensional travel. It was thought lost millennia ago until it started activating recently, creating the tiers we've been monitoring. But why my farms, why Earth at alls? That, Lyra said, leading him toward a preparation area where teams were donning what appeared to be protective gear, is the question we all want answered. Within the hour, Thorn found himself back on Earth, though not in the way he'd expected. They'd transported directly from the Asteria to his property using some kind of matter displacement technology that had left him nauseated and disoriented. Now he stood at the edge of his pasture, surrounded by Sentinel officers in sleek protective suits, watching as they deployed scanning equipment across his land. Lyra remained by his side, her own suit more streamlined than the others, her amber eyes visible through the transparent faceplate. The artifact's energy signature is strongest here, she explained, indicating a point near the center of the pasture. But it's deep, at least 50 meters below the surface. That's impossible, Thorn protested. We dug a well years ago, barely 20 meters deep. There was nothing but rock and soil. The Nexus key doesn't obey conventional physics, Lyra replied. It exists partially outside normal spacetime. Our scans can detect its energy, but pinpointing its exact location is challenging. As they spoke, the sky above them darkened unnaturally, clouds swirling in a vortex that centered directly above the pasture. The air crackled with electricity, and Thorn felt the hair on his arms stand on end. The tier is widening, Lyra said, concern evident in her voice. We're running out of time. One of the Sentinel officers approached, holding a device that emitted a high-pitched whine. Agent Voss, we've triangulated the artifact's position, but the density readings are inconsistent. It seems to be moving. Lyra frowned. That's not possible unless, her eyes widened in sudden understanding. It's not buried, it's being carried. As if in response to her words, a familiar bark echoed across the pasture. Rusty bounded toward them, something clutched in his mouth, something that glowed with an unearthly light, pulsing in rhythm with the swirling clouds overhead. The key, Lyra breathed, your companion animal found it. Thorn knelt as Rusty approached, the dog's tail wagging despite the strange object he carried. It was a small crystalline structure, no larger than a fist, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as Thorn watched. Easy boy, he murmured, carefully taking the artifact from Rusty's mouth. It was surprisingly light, almost weightless, yet he could feel power thrumming through it, ancient and vast, like holding a piece of a star. The Sentinel officers converged around them, their scanning devices beeping urgently. Lyra knelt beside Thorn, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. The Nexus key, she said softly, after all this time. What do we do with it? Thorn asked, the artifact warm against his palm. Before Lyra could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. The tier in the sky widened further, and through it, Thorn glimpsed something beyond, not stars or space, but a landscape of impossible geometry, where the laws of physics seemed optional rather than mandatory. It's too late, one of the officers cried. The tier is becoming a full breach. Through the widening gap came the rift stalkers, dozens of them, their amorphous bodies shifting and reforming as they poured through the dimensional wound. They converged on the pasture, drawn inexorably to the key in Thorn's hand. Defensive positions, Lyra shouted, activating some kind of energy weapon that materialized from her suit's gauntlet. The other officers followed suit, forming a protective circle around Thorn and the artifact. Captain Caldwell's voice crackled over their communication system. The breach is critical, deploy the stabilizers now. But sir, one of the officers protested, the native is expendable, Caldwell cut in, the key must be secured at all costs. Thorn looked down at the artifact in his hand, then up at the tier in reality above them. In that moment he understood this wasn't just about his farm or his sheep. This was about something much bigger, something that threatened not just his world but countless others. What happens if I destroy it? He asked Lyra, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Lyra's eyes widened. Destroy the key, it's impossible, it's composed of elements that don't exist in your dimension. But if it were possible... She hesitated. In theory, destroying it would seal all the tiers it's created, but the energy release would be catastrophic. Thorn nodded, his decision made. He whistled for Rusty, who bounded to his side despite the advancing rift stalkers. I need you to do something for me, Lyra. Take care of my dog. Thorn, what are you? But he was already moving, sprinting toward the center of the pasture where the dimensional tier was at its widest. The rift stalkers howled, sensing his intention, and surged forward to intercept him. Seal the tiers, Thorn called over his shoulder, and find my sheep. With those final words, he clutched the Nexus key to his chest and leaped upward into the swirling vortex of the dimensional breach. As he passed through, he felt the key pulse one final time against his heart, as if acknowledging his sacrifice. Then came the light, blinding, all-encompassing, as the Nexus key reacted to its passage through the tier. The artifact that had existed outside normal spacetime for millennia could not survive the transit. It shattered, releasing its energy in a cascading wave that rippled outward through the dimensional breach. On the pasture below, Lyra and the Sentinel officers were thrown to the ground by the shockwave. The rift stalkers howled in agony as the energy wave consumed them, their bodies dissolving into motes of light that scattered on the wind. Slowly, inexorably, the tier in the sky began to close, reality knitting itself back together in the absence of the key's disruptive influence. The strange landscape on the other side receded, becoming first a narrow sliver, then a line, then nothing at all. The clouds dispersed, revealing a clear blue sky as if nothing had happened. Lyra stood, her amber eyes fixed on the spot where Thorn had vanished. He knew, she whispered. Somehow he knew. Captain Caldwell's voice came through their communications again, subdued now. Agent Voss, report what happened. The human, Lyra replied, her voice thick with an emotion she hadn't expected to feel. He took the key through the breach. The resulting energy release sealed all the tears. And the humans. Lyra looked down at Rusty, who sat beside her watching the sky with faithful eyes. Gone but not forgotten. In the days that followed, as the Sentinel Corps validated that all dimensional tiers had indeed been sealed, Lyra made good on her promise. She recovered Thorn's sheep from their pocket of stable spacetime, returning them to the pasture where they belonged. She arranged for Rusty to be cared for by Thorn's nearest neighbor, an elderly woman who had always admired his way with animals. And on the night before the Sentinels departed Earth, Lyra stood alone in Thorn's pasture under a sky full of stars. She placed her palm against the ground where the Nexus key had been found, feeling the faint echo of energy that still lingered there. The Cosmic Shepherd, she murmured, using the title that Captain Caldwell had surprisingly bestowed upon Thorn in the official report. Guardian of Worlds. Somewhere beyond the boundaries of their reality, she hoped Thorn Blackwood had found peace, or perhaps, in keeping with his nature, a new flock to tend.